Billionaire Romance. Book 1. Catching His Eyes. By Nola King. Description.
I had not time to even consider a relationship until I was trapped in an elevator with a woman who might just be perfect for me. Except for the fact that she's my employee. But that's okay. I have a plan to make her fall for me, as long as I don't make her hate me first.
Being trapped in an elevator wasn't what I expected for my first day at my new big job. Thank goodness for the handsome hunk who helps keep me calm. But after our rescue, he asks me out and I discover that he's no average coworker. He's a billionaire.
Chapter 1. Palm trees lined the street, stationed before stone and brick office fronts, some with wooden shutters painted bright blue, emerald green, or stately black. Savannah was a memory of a different time, one in which wagons would have been rolling down the cobblestone streets, instead of the SUVs and pickups I saw out my window today. Mine was one of the SUVs, painted an imposing black, projecting strength and wealth. My impenetrable moving fortress. I pulled myself away from the window and focused on my phone, pulling up today's schedule. A list of the usual meetings and conference calls scrolled by. Noticing the charity event scheduled for this evening, I sighed. I longed to be able to write a check to these charities instead of being forced through an overly complicated meal and predictable speeches. Even worse was the elbow rubbing. Sure, I enjoyed the company of several of my peers and neighbors, but there was one person in particular I wouldn't mind avoiding. She just happened to be my mother. At every one of these events, she trotted out a new eligible female. Someone polished, with a well-established family. One who couldn't wait to feather our nest, play at homemaker, and smile by my side during my inevitable political campaign. These were the things my mother wanted for me. It wasn't a bad life that Mom had envisioned. It just wasn't my life. Empire building took all of my focus, and even if I had time for a relationship, it wouldn't be with one of these milksop females my mother kept pushing in front of me. I wanted a woman who didn't just stand by my side with a simpering smile. I wanted one who was my equal in the boardroom and in the bedroom. Someone who stole my attention, not faded into the background. So far, I hadn't found a woman who fired my imagination, not like a new business deal or emerging partnership did. I guess I'm married to my job. As if on cue, my phone started to ring. It was my mother, calling to make certain I'd be at the event tonight. Wouldn't miss it, I said with false cheer. My mother was well versed in seeing past my veneer. Oh, Nathaniel, I know you find these things tedious, but I have no idea why. Could it be that they're all the same progression of boring food, boring speeches, and boring conversation? She scoffed and adopted her be reasonable tone. You think anything that isn't acquiring a new company or breaking ground on some new real estate deal is boring. Socializing with the good people of Savannah is hardly a hardship. You're right, Mother. That was my go-to phrase for getting her off the phone in the shortest time possible. Of course I am, dear. Now, make sure your hair is presentable this time. I have someone I want to introduce you to. Of course you do, Mother. My hair is always presentable. Last time you didn't even bother to run a comb through it. It was sticking out every which way. The every which way is the newest trend. Just ask my stylist. I could hear her rolling her eyes over the phone. And don't spend all your time looking at your phone. That last girl was distraught at how little you interacted. Mother, you tossed her at me when I was right in the middle of intense negotiations for a potential merger. I told you I didn't have time for chit-chat then. You never have time, she lamented. You're always working. Meanwhile, I'm getting older. I want some grandchildren while I'm still young enough to chase them around the yard. If I had $1 for the number of times my mother had said that phrase, I'd never have to make another deal in my life. Got to go, Mom. I'm pulling up to the office. I'll see you tonight, she grumbled, then made a smooching noise in my ear. Have a good day. I love you. Love you too, Mom. Even though she got on my last nerve, I loved her fiercely. The SUV pulled up to the curb in front of the Parker Group's headquarters, an historic building made of cream-colored brick and white stone. 10 stories tall and dominating an entire city block, I was filled with pride each morning when I stood in front of her, admiring my handiwork. Although my family had a long history in Savannah stretching back to before the Civil War, its fortunes had dwindled over time. I'd made it my mission to uphold my family's honor while refilling our coffers to the tune of several $billion. It was a gamble, leveraging the last of my family's assets, but the risk had paid off, and now the Parker name was synonymous with wealth once again. Entering the building, I headed for the elevators. There was a bank of 3, and a small crowd had gathered in front of them. I waited for the next elevator to arrive, then climbed inside with a small group. I was just pressing the top floor when I saw a woman dash forward, waving in my direction. "Hold the elevator," she called as she rushed toward me, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She was beautiful, so beautiful that I almost forgot to push the button to stop the doors from closing. I remembered in time, and she slid into the elevator, letting out a little breath of relief. She was stunning, waves of auburn hair tumbling over shapely shoulders. Sun-kissed skin, succulent curves, and green eyes that reminded me of a cat's. I had to tell myself to breathe when I was looking at her. The elevator paused at a floor and several people filed out, and after the next pause, only she and I were left. I stood there, debating whether to speak to her, when a sudden jolt rocked the elevator. My companion gave a little cry, thrown off balance by the sudden shift, and instinctively I grabbed her, pressing her against the elevator wall. My protective instincts kicked in without warning, and I did what I could to make her safe. The elevator ground to a halt, leaving us between floors. "Are you okay?" I asked, looking down into those spectacular green eyes. She nodded, staring up at me, and I was momentarily spellbound. I'd never been affected like this by a woman before. Finally, I realized I was still holding her close to me. I had to force myself to release my grip on her, wanting instead to pull her closer. "I apologize for grabbing you," I said as I took a step back. She nodded again, brushing back a piece of hair that had fallen across her forehead and looking away, her cheeks heating. It took balling my hands into fists and shoving them into my pockets to keep me from embracing her again. Forcing my mind back to our predicament, I calculated the best course of action to let someone know we were trapped. Luckily, I'd insisted on remodeling the majority of the building when I'd taken over ownership, which included new elevators with state-of-the-art intercom systems. I hit the call button, waiting for a response. Maintenance was that response. "I'm in elevator 3. It's stuck between floors 7 and 8. I heard the voice on the other end sigh. "That one gives us the most trouble. The crew has started saying it's haunted. I'll get the service crew up on it immediately. Hold tight." A haunted elevator in my multi-million-dollar headquarters. It was too Savannah for words. I turned back to my lovely companion and gave her what I hoped was a disarming smile. "Well, I'm sure we'll be back in business in no time. In the meanwhile, it wouldn't hurt to introduce ourselves. I'm Nathaniel." I extended my hand for shaking, and she took it, her own hand delicate compared to my big paw. Tingles of electricity spread through me at our contact. What was it about this delicate creature that made my body react like this? "Georgina," she replied, and I noticed a sweet southern twang in her voice. It melted me like honey, smooth and slow, that voice. I'd never believed in love at first sight. In fact, I'd never really thought about love, except maybe in the abstract. But as I stood there, breathing in the loveliness that was the gorgeous Georgina, I began to wonder if maybe I was missing out on something even more intense than making a business deal worth billions. Georgina seemed like she could be the greatest adventure I'd ever embark upon in my life, and that thought was exhilarating. I suddenly hoped that the maintenance crew would take their time getting around to fixing our elevator. Being trapped until afternoon didn't seem like long enough time to spend with that red-headed beauty.
Chapter 2. I'd never gotten a rush of tingles from shaking a man's hand before. Then again, I'd never shaken hands with what looked to be an angel, fallen to earth only to put on a tailored suit and some kind of cologne that smelled how I imagined the inside of a bank vault would smell. He was handsome. No, more than handsome. This man could have walked off the page of any magazine and not looked as if the change from 2 to 3 dimensions caused him any effort. He was flawless. Impeccable. Sexy. I pulled my hand back, flashing a nervous smile before turning away again to focus on the doors, which weren't opening anytime soon, it seemed. Today was my first day at the Parker Group, and of course, I started trapped in an elevator before I'd even made it to my department. It seemed the good old Franklin luck was still running strong outside of Stone Mountain. At least I look halfway presentable, I figured, catching a glimpse of myself in the polish of the stainless steel elevator doors. Thank goodness Sam made me buy a new outfit for my first day. You never know when you're going to get trapped in an elevator with God's gift to womankind. I tried not to focus on the trapped aspect of my current situation. Being trapped brought back memories of the cave, and that sent me to a bad place very quickly. I crossed my arms in an unconscious self-hug, trying to ward off thoughts of being stuck in absolute darkness, unsure if I'd ever make it out alive. My companion must have sensed my nervousness because he said that he was certain the technicians would be there soon to get us out. It won't be long. He leaned back against the elevator wall. I don't think I've seen you around before. It's my first day, I confessed. Nathaniel let out a startled laugh. First day? Well, this is quite a way to make an entrance. I giggled. I couldn't help myself. It's definitely not how I was expecting my morning to go. What department are you in? Research and data analysis, I replied, wondering if it would send out a nerd alert. I doubted a man like Nathaniel was into girls who spent their free time doing logarithm puzzles and statistical modeling for fun. Instead of remarking on my inherent nerdiness, he chose another area to focus on. I can't help but notice a little bit of an accent. Where are you from? I bit my lip, shaking my head gently. Is it that noticeable? I mean, we're both in Georgia. He chuckled. I like it. Still, I was born and bred here, in Savannah, and it's not a Savannah accent I hear rolling off your tongue. Stone Mountain. He nodded, the corners of his mouth lifting. What's it like? I looked at him, wondering if the confusion I felt was apparent on my face. A Savannah gentleman like him would probably never venture near my flyspeck of a hometown, despite its natural beauty. I'm sure it's nothing interesting. Georgina, I'm certain you've noticed that we're stuck in an elevator for an indeterminate amount of time. There's no harm in getting to know one another in the meantime. I suppose. His smile was blinding. So tell me about Stone Mountain. The town is small, the population only a few thousand, counting just locals. We get plenty of tourists up to see the mountain, but the village itself is just a few dozen shops and restaurants catering to the Atlanta folks who vacation there. It's basically a suburb with a really nice backyard. Full of girls whose voices are sweeter than extra sugar in your sweet tea? I laughed. My accent's not that bad. Besides, it's not like Savannah doesn't have its own drawl. True, he said with a nod, just yours seems, somehow nicer. Trying to hide a blush, I hurried to change the subject. The way he looked at me, like I was the only thing in the world worth paying attention to, was making me feel off balance. Look, dummy, you're the only other person in this elevator. Don't let it go to your head. Growing up in Savannah must have been interesting. With a shrug of his shoulders, he said everything. And nothing. Savannah is a lovely town full of venerable old families, old buildings, old houses, I think you catch my drift. Laughing, I nodded. Stone Mountain isn't exactly young. I mean, they've built a lot of things to get tourist dollars, but the bones of the place go back almost as far as Savannah. And as for the mountain itself, it's beyond old. I thought about the mountain, about the few 100 million years of history steeped into the stone. I thought about how I'd felt, wandering in the dark, feeling that history pressing in all around me until I couldn't breathe. I had to force my mind onto something else, make myself not think about how I was trapped again, before the walls started to close in and I went into full-on panic mode. So how do people have fun around here? I asked, my voice sounding too high to me, but Nathaniel didn't seem to notice. There's plenty to do, if you like live music, overpriced cocktails, and upscale restaurants with ingredients so unique you'd wonder how the chef ever thought to put them together. He chuckled softly. Actually, I'm not a foodie, so don't take my word for it. I usually grab some takeout on my way home from the office. Takeout? I glanced down at his left hand, noticing quickly that it was ringless. Could it be true? No woman had locked down this angel come to earth yet? If that was the case, I might as well swing for the fences. When was the next time I'd be trapped in an elevator with a hunk like Nathaniel? Maybe I could find a way to get him to show me around town. I'd only been in Savannah for a couple weeks. A tour with a local would help me situate myself in my new surroundings. Plus, it would give me a chance to spend more time with Nathaniel in a more casual environment. One where we weren't forced together by chance. But I wasn't the type to take the easy route and just ask. No, I had to goad him to offer. Don't ask me why. It just seemed more amusing that way. Takeout? Huh. Does that mean you're one of those men who is afraid to set foot in the kitchen lest your masculinity abandon you at the first mention of a roux? I injected my tone with levity, which he quickly picked up on. A roux. That means a street, if I remember my French correctly. If he speaks French, I'm going to find a way to make sure we're stuck in this elevator for eternity. Exactly like I thought. Let me guess, Mom did all the cooking and never bothered to show you what she was teaching your sisters? Not quite. My mother probably knows less about cooking than I do, and I'm an only child. Good guess, though. Who did the cooking in your household then? Your father? He laughed once, like a knee-jerk reaction, and it told me that his father was not a culinary master either. If you're wondering why I eat takeout, it's because it saves time. I often work late. I noticed the diversion but decided to allow it, wondering how to get this conversation back on track. Workaholic? Huh. That's a shame. Why is that, he said, a small grin on his striking features. Well, that means you're not taking part in any of this nightlife you talked up earlier. He laughed. You caught me. I'm not much of a nightlife kind of guy. Which means you can't show me around, since it's likely you don't go out yourself. It was half a surrender, I realized that, but a girl like me wasting time waiting for a guy like Nathaniel to offer was foolish. My grandpa used to say, you gotta make hay when the sun is shining. And this was the closest I would get to a sun shining on me and Nathaniel. His eyes widened, then he let out a chuckle. I think I could manage to show you a thing or two, he said, his tone going husky. I looked up at him, at his light brown hair artfully sculpted to seem like it hadn't been touched, at his strong, straight nose and his eyes that looked almost golden in this light. He was beautiful enough to make me swallow hard as the tension between us increased. Does that mean you're offering to show me around Savannah? I asked, surprised at how low and sultry my own tone had become. Nathaniel nodded. That's right. You should see the town through the eyes of a local, even if it's with one who doesn't hit the trendiest spots that often. I realized he'd moved closer, his face near enough to mine that I could feel his breath on my cheek. Trendy is overrated, I breathed. What I'm looking for is something more authentic. With a touch of class. And an air of mystery. Are we still talking about showing you a good time? He asked, slipping closer. Yes. A very good time, I said, our lips only inches apart. Excitement rose inside me. This handsome, cultured man was about to kiss me, and I was all in. Until I wasn't. "The crew is working on the problem," a voice blasted from the intercom. "We should have you out of there in no time." I took a step back, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding and fanning myself. The chemistry between us was next level, and it had almost led to something inappropriate between two new coworkers. Nathaniel leaned back against the elevator wall again, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "Thank you," he said, not seeming to care if the disembodied voice heard him or not. I closed my eyes briefly, breathing through the arousal that was stronger than I'd felt in ages. Something about Nathaniel just pushed all the right buttons. I'd have to be careful around him, or risk jeopardizing the career I'd only just established.
Chapter 3. I wanted to strangle whoever was on the other end of the intercom. I'd been seconds away from tasting those plump lips before we were rudely interrupted. She'd put some distance between us, her cheeks flushing an adorable shade of pink. Georgina was so unconsciously charming that I was instantly addicted to her. She was completely different from the women my mother paraded before me, hoping one would catch my eye. They were different shade of beige. Georgina, however. Georgina was a rainbow. Silence filled the tiny elevator, and I lamented the intimacy of a moment ago. Desperate for it to return, I steered us back into conversation. "What have you seen of the city in the time you've been here?" Georgina shrugged one of her delicate shoulders. "We've walked around downtown, through that charming park with all the trees and the big fountain." "Forsyth Park," I said. It was a much beloved, much photographed green space. "How about the city market?" "Yes," she said, smiling. We spent a long afternoon wandering the stalls. That was twice that she'd said we. I wondered suddenly if she had a boyfriend. The thought sent an irrational wave of jealousy through me. "We?" I said, injecting as much casualness into the one word as I could, despite the torrent of emotion flowing through me. "My roommate and I. She came from Stone Mountain with me. We've been friends since the 4th grade." The tension left me, and I chastised myself for allowing myself to get into such a state. I barely knew her, but Georgina affected me in a way I wasn't prepared for. I didn't want it to stop. "So how does Savannah stack up to Stone Mountain?" She laughed, a sound that reminded me of songbirds greeting the sun, a clear, happy sound that made me insides warm. "They're very different. Stone Mountain makes you appreciate the majesty of nature, but Savannah makes you appreciate the ingenuity of man. The old houses, the tree-lined streets that have withstood the march of boots and the march of time." The faraway, thoughtful look on her face endeared her to me further. She blinked, then apologized. I was a moment away from pulling her into my arms when my phone started to ring. Mentally cursing whoever was interrupting this little moment, I pulled it out to check the number, then answered. "You want to tell me where you are this morning? Your 10 o'clock has arrived and is eyeing me from the waiting area." It was Angie, my no-nonsense executive assistant. Angie kept my schedule organized and me on my toes. She was less than enthusiastic when my day went off the rails. Like today. "Good morning, Miss Angie," I said, trying for the same cheerful tone that had so impressed my mother earlier. "I'm stuck in an elevator at the moment, so you may have to adjust my schedule accordingly." My tone went just as far with Angie as it had with Mom. There was a brief pause, then a heartfelt sigh. "You could have come up with something better than that. Your folks didn't pay for all that expensive schooling for you to tell me such see-through bull as that." I laughed. I couldn't help myself. "It's true, Angie. Call maintenance. They'll back me up." Another short pause. "I have half a mind to call them," she grumbled. "Angie, I'm stuck in here with a Miss Georgina." I turned to the beauty, realizing I didn't know her last name. "Franklin," she whispered. "A Miss Georgina Franklin," I said into the phone. "She's in research." Call down there and let them know she's going to be late. Miss Georgina Franklin. Well, this is a new one. I've heard you make up plenty of excuses, but never a woman before. Call maintenance, I said, then chuckled. Oh, believe me, I will. And if you're really stuck in an elevator, then I'm going to hound them until they get you out of there. I expected nothing less. I'm going to have to reschedule all these meetings, she grumbled, trailing off. See you soon, Angie. I disconnected the call and shoved the phone back into my pocket. Thank you for letting my department know the situation, Georgina said. I'm afraid I'm totally screwing up my first impression. Nonsense, I said, feeling the overwhelming need to comfort her. On the contrary, just think of the story you'll have to tell now about your first day. It's certainly unforgettable. She laughed. Unforgettable is right. Her eyes met mine and her words became heavy with meaning. The way she was looking at me filled me with need. The need to kiss her, to learn her unique flavor. The need to hold her in my arms, to learn her body. The need to know everything about her, how she thought, her likes and dislikes. The need to keep her for my own. There was no way to express that need to her, so I lamely decided I would invite her to lunch. It was a start, after all. I was just opening my mouth to suggest it when my phone buzzed in my pocket. Pulling it out, I saw a text message from Axel. Hey bruh. Need a date for the shindig tonight? I got just the thing for you. I frowned and started typing a reply, but before I could finish and hit send, another text came through. My date has a roomie smoking hot. They're both models and want a little red carpet exposure. What do you say? My answer was easy enough, not interested. He responded with 3 eye-roll emojis. Axel Marston had been my buddy for years, ever since we met in the exclusive private school where our parents had enrolled us. He was a good guy, but more into having a good time than getting ahead. Probably because Axel didn't need to get ahead. His family had more money than God, so he could blow limitless amounts on a lifetime of models, and not even make a dent in their fortune. Come on, bud, do me a solid. It will help you out too, keep your mother off your back for the night. He wasn't wrong. Showing up with a date would throw mom off her stride. But I had less than zero interest in hanging out with a fame-obsessed model only interested in my money or the cameras. She would be as bad, or worse, than whatever female my mother had designs on. I snuck a peek at Georgina. She was lost in thought, a finger unconsciously curling a strand of fiery hair around her finger. Every moment spent with her, I fell more deeply under her spell. She was enchanting, an intoxicating mix of innocence and intelligence. She was genuine in a way I'd seen so seldom in my life. I knew things wouldn't be the same once we left the elevator. Already have a date. Sorry. I didn't know what made me text those words to my friend, seeing as how they were absolutely untrue. But I decided that they wouldn't be, not for long. I'd been about to ask Georgina out for lunch, but why settle for a lunch date when I could have her for the entire evening? I hadn't felt this way about a woman in, well, ever, to be honest, so I wasn't going to waste this opportunity, even if it meant that Axel had to find someone else to walk his model's roommate down the red carpet. No way. The great Nathaniel Parker actually has a date? I don't believe it. Who is this, and what have you done with my friend? It was my turn to reply with the eye-roll emoji. I returned the phone to my pocket, determined to turn my temporary falsehood into the truth. Turning to Georgina, I gently called her name to get her attention. Having those emerald eyes on me made it hard for me to think, but I attempted to focus, trying to determine the best way to invite her out tonight. But the moment I opened my mouth to speak, the voice from the intercom was back. Hey folks, sorry for the delay. We need to reboot the system, which means we'll be cutting power for a bit. Just hold tight, and we'll get you out as soon as we can. It was the only warning we received before the elevator car was plunged into darkness. It was pervasive, so dark that, looking down, I couldn't see my silk tie or the expensive watch on my wrist. I wasn't sure I'd ever been in such a deep dark before, the lack of windows, and the elevator shaft ensuring that complete absence of light. Out of the darkness, I heard a pitiful little whimper, so soft that for a moment, I wasn't sure I'd heard anything at all. When I realized it had come from Georgina, my heart contracted in my chest, as if it were in a vice. As quickly as I could, I pulled my phone back out of my pocket and engaged the flashlight app. The little light pushed back the darkness just enough for me to find my companion. She was huddled in the corner, her arms wrapped around her legs, her face buried in her knees. She looked so small, so afraid, that my protective instincts kicked into overdrive. I had to comfort her, had to make her feel safe. It was a compulsion greater than any I'd ever felt. Dropping to my knees, I approached her, speaking softly as I got closer, not trying to scare her any more than she already was. Georgina was like a child terrified of the dark and the creature lurking under her bed, and I was about to prove to her that I would protect her from any monster who dared to lay a finger on her.
Chapter 4. I couldn't believe this was happening to me. My worst fear was happening, here and now. The darkness had weight, and I could feel it pressing down on my chest, just like that day. I started to gasp, but every breath felt like it was harder to draw. I didn't realize I was whimpering until I felt Nathaniel's hand on my shoulder. He'd turned on a light, but by then, it was too late. The panic had set in, twisting my insides, making me shake. All I could think about was that day in the cave, the day I was certain I would never make it home again. The fear of that experience had affected me ever since. I'd avoided tight spaces and dark, enclosed areas as they triggered a resurgence of that same fear. But elevators hadn't really registered as one of those spaces. Until today. "Georgina," he said, his voice soft, his tone comforting. "It's okay. We're going to be all right. Just breathe." I could hear him, but I wasn't processing the words. They were coming from far away, just like the light was. I was trapped in that cave, praying for a way out, oblivious to anything outside the damp stone confines of my prison. Then he pulled me into his arms and pressed his face close to mine. "Breathe, Georgina," he said, his tone more forceful. The combination of his warmth pressed against me and the authority in his voice finally got through the fog of fear. I inhaled, heavily, then let out a sob. Nathaniel buried my head in his chest, gently rocking me. "It's okay," he murmured. "You're going to be okay." "I'm sorry," I mumbled against his chest when I could speak again. Realizing I was leaving wet spots on his expensive jacket, I tried to pull back, but he wouldn't let me. "Shh. Just relax," he said, kissing the top of my head. "You don't need to apologize." I melted into him, accepting his words and letting his strong arms comfort me. Hearing his heartbeat helped to calm me, and soon my breathing returned to normal. But as it did, embarrassment welled up inside me. I was trapped with the handsomest man I'd ever seen, and here I was, making a fool of myself. Even worse, he was a coworker, and I'd already wheedled a promise from him to show me around town. Boy, I bet he's regretting that now. There was no way he was going to like me after this little display. I began to pull away, and this time he let me. I wiped my eyes and tried for a smile, but it wouldn't stick. The light was bright enough that I could make out Nathaniel's features. Concern was writ large. "Thank you," I said, straightening so that my back was once again against the elevator wall. I have a bit of claustrophobia, and this has set it off." "I'm glad you're feeling better," he said, his voice warm and clear. And curiously lacking judgment. Could it be that he wasn't upset at my reaction? I haven't had a meltdown like this in quite a while. I assure you I'm not usually so. As I said before, no need to apologize, and there is no reason to feel embarrassed about what happened. I just want to make sure that you're okay. Could a man this nice really exist? His words took some of the tension out of me, and before I realized it, I was explaining what had happened that day, and the effect it continued to have on me. I was always trying to impress the neighbor boys, I said, my tone stumbling at first, then picking up speed. They were a couple years older and I just thought they were so cool. Always getting up to some trouble. Stealing a boat and rowing it across the lake. Digging holes in the woods right past their yard to booby-trap their territory. But the thing that got them in the most trouble was playing in the unmarked mountain caves. Taking a deep breath, I continued. This wasn't the well-lit, TV screen-adorned cave that the tourists visit. These were unexplored, their entrances little more than cracks in the mountain surface. The boys decided that they were going to explore one that day. They didn't inform me until we got out there, so I was the only one without a flashlight. I swallowed hard as the memories started to overtake me. At first it was fun. We were poking around in the cave, marveling at the wonders hidden in the ground. But then, it wasn't so fun. My heart was beating hard, but I wouldn't stop now. I should have guessed they had something like this planned. They were always messing with me, screwing over the girl, they called it. I'd fallen behind as we clambered over a rock formation into another section of the cave. They didn't wait for me. I remembered the fear that had filled me as their flashlights got farther and farther away. I didn't have a light of my own, and so I started hollering for them to come back, or to stop, to just wait for me. But they didn't. They left me in the dark. His arms were back then, and I was thankful for them. Nathaniel held me as I told him what I'd experienced that day. It was a darkness so universal, I've never experienced anything like it until just a few minutes ago. I couldn't see my hand 1 inch in front of my face. I could hear them hooting and hollering in the distance, and I screamed for them, frantic, but there was no answer. I kept going in the direction they'd gone for as long as I could, but then I slipped, tumbling off some rocks and banging up my elbow and my knees. That's when I gave up, collapsing into a ball and crying. I didn't know how I was going to find my way out with no light, all alone. Those little jerks, Nathaniel growled, his voice sounding savage. How could they do that to you? I shrugged. They didn't mean it, not really. They were just dumb boys playing a prank. And I can't be too mad at them, because it was due to their shouting that I managed to find my way out. The older brother had convinced the younger one to make a leap from one formation to another, but the little one couldn't make it. He fell instead, breaking his leg. His screams were loud enough to make it back to me. So I crawled toward them, until I could once again see the light. I remembered the look of panic on the older boy's face when I finally found them again. The older brother gave me one of the flashlights and told me to get help. I did what he said, bringing their father to the cave entrance. But nothing could compel me to go back inside. You were lucky, Nathaniel breathed against my ear. Caves are no place to play. Something worse could have happened to you. I let out a watery laugh. Well, I think that was bad enough, thank you. Small, dark places make me collapse in a heap, shaking, unable to breathe. It's hard enough dealing with the small bouts of panic that arise anytime I'm somewhere too confined, or too dark. His arms tightened around me. I'm annoyed enough to track down those boys and give them a piece of my mind. Amazed, I let out a giggle. Don't worry, their mama made certain they never did anything that foolish again. She tanned the older one's hide and made sure both of them were grounded for the rest of the summer. Not enough, he grumbled against my neck, igniting little tingles all across my skin. I could get used to being in Nathaniel's arms. It was quickly becoming my favorite place to be. You lived through something very traumatic, and you shouldn't be embarrassed if sometimes those feelings of fear and helplessness come back. It's nothing to be ashamed of. In fact, it just shows how strong you are. His words gave me hope. Thank you, I said, softly, then turned to face him. I assumed you were head of one of the departments, but now I'm starting to think you might be the company counselor. Nathaniel chuckled, a smile appearing on his face. Not quite. Although sometimes I feel like the head lunatic in the asylum. I laughed, snuggling in tighter, my heart expanding when he held me close, brushing the stray locks of hair off my face. We sat like that for a while, quiet in the dim light of his phone. After a few moments, our breathing synced, and it felt like we were one organism, a strangely comforting thought. Nathaniel must have sensed I was feeling calmer, because he lifted his head and his tone became more normal. I wonder if you could do me a favor. A favor? I laughed, wondering where this was coming from. How could I say no, after you just saved me from a major meltdown? He chuckled. This isn't a quid pro quo, at least, that's not my intention. I turned, catching a glimpse of his expression. It was neutral, but I sensed something beneath it, some level of doubt. I've got this thing tonight, this event. My friend is going to be there, and he's trying to set me up with someone. Someone I'm really not interested in. I wondered if you might accompany me, to save me the awkwardness of having to go with someone else. I considered his words. Nathaniel was asking me out on a date, sort of. It was about as ambiguous as him showing me around town. Nothing that would cross a line, nothing inappropriate, but still, he was asking as he held me tightly against his muscled chest. I wanted to go, I realized that right away, but I wasn't sure whether it would be a smart move on my part. I was new, and he was a coworker. It might not technically violate the terms human resources had laid out in my online onboarding packet, but I was new and wanted to make a good impression. Still, I wasn't immune to his charms. In fact, it was almost the opposite. The more time I spent with Nathaniel, the more I wanted to spend. And a night out with him would go a long way toward eliminating these difficult feelings when we finally managed to escape the elevator. I'd love to come, I said, my voice soft. Wonderful, he said, his voice husky in my ear. I turned to him, his eyes flashing in the dim confines, as if they were glowing with a light of their own. Those eyes were trained on my lips, causing a heat to fill me. For a moment, I was certain that this time, he'd kiss me. Then the lights came on.
Chapter 5. I held back the string of curses as light filled the elevator car. Another moment ruined by these darn elevator technicians. Why couldn't they be a little less professional? Hey folks, me again, said the disembodied voice from the intercom. We've just about got everything repaired, so we'll have you out in just a minute. Figures, I grumbled, then pulled myself off the floor, turning to help Georgina to her feet. A moment afterwards, the elevator jolted back to life, heading upwards. It seemed the repairs were finally complete. I looked at the woman next to me, this strong, intelligent, beautiful woman, and knew there were scant few moments left in her company. Glancing at the number display, I realized we were just about to hit her floor. That meant that I had only seconds to make a decision. I went for it. I grabbed her hand, yanking her into my arms. Her eyes were wide, her mouth open in a small O of surprise. Not willing to waste this opportunity, my head swooped down and I pressed my lips against hers. Her lips were soft, plump, delicious. I kissed her for everything I was worth. At first, I wasn't sure how she would respond, but then she kissed me back, sending lightning shooting through my body. In that moment, I knew that I had to make her mine. Georgina Franklin was the only woman I'd ever wanted, and the only woman I ever would want. I broke away just before the elevator let out a ding and the doors slid open. I'll call you later to let you know the details of tonight, I said. She nodded, looking dazed, and walked out of the elevator and onto her floor. The doors closed, and I was alone. I leaned back against the elevator wall, already replaying the memory of that amazing kiss. Lost in remembering the feel of her lips against mine, it took me a couple beats to realize the elevator had reached the top floor. I walked out just before the doors started to close again. I was free from the elevator, but part of me wished I was still in there, holding Georgina close to me. Reminding myself that I'd be seeing her again tonight, I started forward to my office. Angie was seated at her desk outside my office door, and she pursed her lips at me. About time. Please send all complaints to the elevator company, Miss Angie, I said, my voice filled with a cheerfulness that for once I genuinely felt. I turned to the waiting area where my first appointment, a slightly pudgy owner of a manufacturing hub in Decatur, was waiting and greeted him. Holding open my office door, I motioned the man inside, then turned back to my assistant. I'll tackle my morning appointments, but I want you to reschedule all of my afternoon commitments. Angie frowned, so I gave her the sweetest smile I could. She stuck her tongue out at me, and I laughed, figuring I had earned that. Then I entered the office and began my day. It was just after noon when I finished the meetings and calls slated for my morning. Finally, I could make the call I'd been waiting to make since I stepped off that elevator. Picking up the phone, I hit the button to connect me to my assistant. Angie, get me the head of research, please. One moment. I waited through the clicks of lines connecting until I heard a voice answer. Angie informed him that Nathaniel Parker was on the line, then disconnected. Hello, I said, my tone amiable. Mr. Parker. What a nice surprise. I knew it was anything but. My department heads were all skilled in their respective areas, and also a bit possessive over them. None relished a call from upstairs that said I was about to meddle in their affairs. Hey there, Dan. I want you to know about a slight change I'm making. You know that new research assistant you recently hired, Georgina Franklin? Yes, his voice drawled out, clearly suspicious. Miss Franklin just started today, after being stuck in an elevator with you. Exactly, I said. I think she's a great find, and to that end, I've decided to transfer her to my personal team. She'll be working for my office, vetting the deals I'm working on directly. Mr. Parker, I think it's great that you realize the level of skill Miss Franklin possesses, but I don't understand why she can't work on those deals in our department, as is customary. I hadn't expected pushback, so I was forced to think on my feet. Your department always does a consistently excellent job, I said, trying for the old compliment sandwich strategy, but sometimes I need to move more quickly, without going through several layers of people. Ms. Franklin will be able to handle those emergency situations, leaving your team to continue to provide the more than competent service you're known for. I held my breath, wondering if he'd go for it or if he'd continue to argue. Instead, he let out a sigh. You're the boss, he said. I'll let Ms. Franklin know she's being transferred. No need, I said with a smile. I'll tell her myself. Oh, and Dan, how does a 10% increase in your departmental budget sound to smooth over any inconvenience this little move might have caused? Sounds like bribery, but I'll take it, he said, then laughed. I didn't exactly like his response, but I brushed it off and said my goodbyes. Leaning back, I took a moment to consider the plan I was setting in motion. It was risky, I was well aware of that, but it was also ambitious. Besides, no one ever got anything good without taking a risk. Picking up the phone again, I began making some calls to set things up for this evening. Everything had to be absolutely perfect, and I would accept nothing less. It's a good thing that almost unlimited money can buy you perfection in spades. Once I was certain that everything would go off without a hitch, I was free to make the call I'd been wanting to make since the moment she left my side. Research. This is Georgina Franklin, she said as she answered her office line. Hey Georgina, long time no talk. It sounded lame coming out, but I committed. Yes, it already feels like forever since we were trapped in that elevator. Remind me to get you a card for our anniversary. I couldn't help laughing at her sardonic sense of humor. It only made her more irresistible to me. I'll see if Hallmark has a line of trapped-together anniversary cards. If not, you might be in the wrong line of work. You've identified a real niche there. It was her turn to laugh. I can see a whole line of cards, from trapped in the car together on a long road trip to being locked out of a house together. Really, the sky is the limit. Don't forget that we're all stuck in this together line of Grandma's Thanksgiving dinner cards. Maybe we should go into business together, she said. You sound like an idea man to me. Going into business with Georgina Franklin sounded like the most exciting thing I could think of. Okay. Why don't you make me an offer at the event tonight? If I like your terms, you have yourself a new partner. Sounds like a plan, she said. And speaking of tonight, where exactly am I meeting you? Yes, you would probably like some details. They do tend to come in handy. Well, if you don't need to rush home after work, I'll have a car pick you up downstairs. That way you don't have to worry about finding some new location in an unfamiliar city. How does that sound? It sounds great, presuming I don't need to change before the event. No issues there, I have you covered. What does that mean? She asked, the first sound of disquiet entering her tone. Don't worry your pretty little head about it. Just be out front at 5 and get into the car I send. Okay. She took a breath. You might have noticed I'm not exactly the no worries type. Like you said, I'm in a new city, and I haven't exactly been to a lot of events back in Stone Mountain, so if I say or do anything that's inappropriate, please let me know so that I don't embarrass you. The thought of her embarrassing me was more ridiculous than the thought of me with one of Axel's models. Don't be silly. There's no way you could embarrass me, even if you showed up to the event in your birthday suit. I hung up then, chuckling, and I could feel her blushing through the phone. I stood then, walking over to the window and looking out over the city of Savannah. It was a cultured gem, a city of refinement, of stately history, the old money of an old world that was only a memory. Savannah was in my blood, my family's story entwined with the city's. My love for my family and for the city was not in doubt, but in that moment I realized that I needed something that wasn't Savannah, that wasn't the same, for me to be truly happy. Georgina wasn't Savannah. She wasn't polished and refined. She was authentic, genuine, non-performative. She didn't hide behind the mask of high society. She'd skipped rocks and spent time in tree houses. She probably enjoyed a cold bottle of beer over a glass of 100-year-old wine. She was no less special for these quirks. Indeed, to me, she was the most unique creature I'd ever met. Tonight, I planned to make her realize what I already had, that we were perfect for each other.
Chapter 6. I hadn't expected my first day at Parker Group to turn out the way it had, but I couldn't deny that it had been eventful. When I had a moment to catch my breath in the late afternoon, I figured it best to give my roommate a call and let her know I wouldn't be home directly after work. Sam answered the phone with her customary greeting. Hello, universe, this is Sam. Hello Sam, this is the universe calling, asking whether you've started the dishwasher yet. I could imagine her face, her big eyes blinking rapidly as she calculated who she was speaking to. Recognition must have dawned, because she quickly responded. Yes. No. I was about to, but then I got an idea for a new painting and I had to break out my sketchbook before I forgot it. I'll do it now. I could hear her get up and cross the kitchen to push the button. The faint rumble of the dishwasher started in the background. How is your first day going? She asked. Interesting, was my reply. Interesting how? Like, welcome to the team, spelled out in donuts interesting? I laughed. More like trapped in an elevator with a handsome stranger interesting. Oh, goodness. You're going to have to tell me everything. I started to relate my morning spent in the company of the fallen angel Nathaniel, putting up with several interruptions from Sam, who wanted every detail of the exchange. I did hide one thing, the kiss. He asked me to go with him to an event tonight. Apparently, his friend is trying to set him up with someone he's not interested in. Did you agree? Please tell me you said yes. I laughed. I said yes. I could visualize the celebration dance my friend was doing in our kitchen even though I couldn't see it. All right, George. Way to bag a hottie. I didn't bag anyone, Sam. I'm doing him a favor. How could I say no after he stopped me from a full-on panic attack on my first day at work? It's fate, Sam crowed. You're just like Cinderella, headed to the ball. Rolling my eyes, I held back an impatient sigh. I should have expected this result from Sam. An artist with a hardcore belief in true love, she was always trying to find the one for me, despite my insistence on focusing on my career. I doubt Cinderella went to her ball in a pencil skirt and peplum top. Nonsense. You have fun tonight. Promise me. I'll promise to have fun if you promise to remember to eat tonight. Her painting tended to drive everything else out of her mind. Deal, she said, and we hung up shortly after. Before I realized it, it was 5 o'clock, and I shoved my things into my bag and rushed out the door, this time opting for the stairs instead of the elevator. Out front, I was looking for a sedan, but instead I saw a long black limo with a suited driver standing before it, holding a sign with my name on it. Are you kidding me? I mumbled to myself as I walked towards the car. The driver opened the door for me and I slid inside, wondering what I'd gotten myself into. The mystery deepened when we pulled up in front of a high-end salon. What are we doing here? I asked when the driver held the door open for me again. He shrugged in response, moving to hold open the salon door for me. I walked inside, wary of what I might find. I was greeted warmly by an employee who showed me to a salon chair. Looking around, I realized that I was the only customer. The other chairs were empty. The stylist began working on my hair, brushing it out and commenting on its thickness. Another woman approached, a tablet in her hand. She asked if she could get me a glass of wine or champagne, but I shook my head, figuring I should stay alert until I could figure out what was happening. The woman handed me the tablet, and I saw a collection of pictures of dresses. She clicked on the first one, a sequin number in navy blue, and asked me my thoughts. I had no idea how to answer, so I said it looked pretty. She started to swipe through the pictures, giving little comments on each, about how it would look with my hair and my skin coloring. I realized that she was suggesting I choose one of these outfits for the event tonight. I started paying attention to the price tags and realized I couldn't afford any of the dresses. May I recommend the green one with the asymmetrical neckline? It will really make your eyes pop. I nodded, not knowing what else to do. The woman took the tablet back and hurried off after checking my dress size. Pulling my attention to the mirror, the stylist asked my thoughts on the hairstyle. She'd pulled most of it up, leaving some long tendrils to curl softly around my shoulders. It's lovely, I said, amazed at how sophisticated it made me look. She'd moved on to my makeup when the second female returned, holding up a garment bag. Carefully, she unzipped it, pulling out the green satin dress she'd suggested. It was gorgeous, and I was almost afraid to touch it, given the price tag. When my makeup was finished, I was shown to the back to try on the dress, a pair of expensive heels thrust into my hands. Coming out of the back to stand in front of a full-length mirror, I was stunned at the transformation. A country girl at heart, I never expected to wear a dress that cost more than 2 months' salary, and shoes that were probably just as pricey. I looked like a princess out of a fairy tale and considered a new Sam's Cinderella comment. Was I really headed to a ball? Reality intruded. I'm sorry to have to tell you this, ladies, but I can't afford all of this. The wardrobe woman laughed. It's all been paid for in advance. My eyes widened. Nathaniel could afford all of this? Surely not. Maybe the dress was a rental, something I'd return tomorrow. There was no way he'd be shelling out all of this money on one night, would he? I returned to the limo, fighting down nerves as I looked at the large houses I was passing as we made our way up a tree-lined street. The limo pulled up in front of a massive antebellum mansion that was one of the most gorgeous houses I've ever seen. It was white with black accents and vines of wisteria climbing the front, Beautiful purple blooms providing a wonderful mixture of man-made architecture and nature's splendor. Suddenly, a door opened and Nathaniel appeared, causing me to wonder if this grand mansion belonged to him. However, the thought didn't stick around for long, because my attention was drawn to what he was wearing. He was dressed in a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. I had to wipe my mouth to make sure I wasn't drooling. He climbed into the limo, greeting me warmly. "You look even lovelier than earlier," he said, picking up my hand and kissing the back of it. "What exactly are we doing tonight?" I asked when I was able to speak again. "Charity dinner. Something about preventing animal abuse." "I assume we'll have an overpriced dinner, we'll sit through some boring speeches, and then, if we're lucky, we'll do some dancing." I was starting to feel overwhelmed at the prospect of an evening that was turning out to be much fancier than I'd anticipated. But when his eyes met mine, all the thoughts flew out of my head. His golden gaze left me breathless in anticipation, and I was resolved to enjoy myself, no matter what. We arrived at a posh hotel, Nathaniel lending me a hand to climb out of the limo. He put his arm through mine to escort me inside, and that was when everything went sideways. Stepping off the elevator at the level of the ballroom, I suddenly realized that there was a red carpet streaming with people. An actual, honest-to-God red carpet. People in their Sunday best were arrayed along it, posing for pictures while a mass of photographers and people with digital recorders shouted out requests and questions. "What is this?" I asked, my grip tightening on Nathaniel's arm. "I guess it's your trial by fire," he said, a mischievous grin on his face. "You'll be fine. Just stand next to me and look gorgeous, which, by the look of you, should be impossible to not do." His compliment warmed my insides. I took a deep breath, following him onto the carpet. Immediately, the press started yelling things in our direction. "Nathaniel, who is the woman you're with? Who are you wearing? Mr. Parker, is the story in the Times true? Was your last deal worth $500 million?" I froze when I heard that last question. "Mr. Parker?" Nathaniel fielded a few of the questions, gently pulling me along the carpet, but I could no longer take in the tumult happening around me. "Mr. Parker. As in Parker Group. Was it possible that the man standing by my side, the man I'd spent the morning confessing my insecurities to, was the CEO of the company that had just hired me? Was it possible that I was on a date with a billionaire?" Nathaniel turned to me, giving me a wink and a smile that made my knees weak. In that moment I realized how royally I'd screwed up. I'd kissed my new employer, who just happened to be one of the richest men in the South. Cinderella only had to worry about losing her shoe. I was about to lose my career. And my heart.
Book 2. Stealing Her Heart. Description:
I knew she was the one for me, but after finding out I was the CEO, she'd never date me. So I fired her. The plan was to transition to something better, but she never gave me a chance to explain. How do I win back the woman who means everything to me when she thinks I'm nothing more than an entitled jerk?
I knew he was handsome and charming, but I didn't know he was my CEO. When I found out, I knew a relationship wasn't possible. So he fired me, just so he could date me. Now I have no dream job or dream man. Is there a way to get either back, or am I better off without them?
Chapter 1. I should have realized that walking the red carpet at one of these galas was a disorienting thing. Just because I'd done it so many times that it was second nature, I'd forgotten how jarring it could be. I could see the shell-shocked expression on Georgina's face, and mentally kicked myself for not doing a better job of preparing her for the experience. "Let's go inside," I said gently as I led her down the carpet, no longer stopping for the cameras. We passed through the doors and into the lavish ballroom, decorated with tasteful photographs of adorable animals. I saw that it was already filled with men and women in expensive dress, a glass of wine or overpriced cognac in their hands, mingling around tables that had tiny name cards set in front of each chair and elaborate floral centerpieces. All in all, it was gala as usual. I felt her grip tighten on my arm as she took in our surroundings. She focused that cat-like gaze on me, and it felt like a body blow, so much did it affect me. How did she manage to take my breath away over and over again? "Who are you?" she whispered, her tone urgent. "Who are you really?" I had expected some sort of reckoning, but for a moment, I'd forgotten that she didn't know I was Nathaniel Parker, CEO of the Parker Group. I'd just been Nathaniel, the guy from the elevator. She might have started to guess when the limo showed up, or at the salon, but if she hadn't been suspicious then, the red carpet treatment would certainly have got her wheels turning. One of the things that attracted me to her was her intelligence, but it seemed like in this instance, she'd been blindsided. I tried on a smile, one that was sincere, and then decided to throw in a dash of swagger. "You are looking at Nathaniel Eastman Parker, Chief Executive Officer of the Parker Group, and owner of 3 elevators, one of them haunted." I knew I risked coming off as pretentious, but I counted on gauging her sense of humor correctly. She blinked up at me, then shook her head, fighting against a grin. "I can't believe I didn't realize you were Nathaniel Parker. I did my research, of course, before accepting this job, but it never crossed my mind that you were the Parker in Parker Group." "Guilty as charged," I said, with the most innocent expression I could muster. Another glance around the room, and her concerned expression was back. I'm not sure this is entirely appropriate. If someone from the office saw us, they might misconstrue." Her words trailed off as she caught sight of someone in the crowd. I followed her gaze, then bit back a curse as I realized my mother was making a beeline straight for us, dragging a pastel-adorned female in her wake. "Nathaniel," she cooed as she walked up to me. "I've been looking all over for you. I want to introduce you to a friend of mine." She tugged tonight's prospect into place by her side, then motioned toward the blonde woman who was smiling with the piousness of a church choir member. I headed her off with my own introduction. "That's convenient, Mother, because I'd also like you to meet my friend, Miss Georgina Franklin." I saw confusion enter my mother's expression, then realization began to dawn. She looked Georgina over from head to toe, clearly shocked that I'd shown up with a date. It was a first, so I couldn't fault her surprise. I saw a small moue of disappointment alight on her companion's face, but my mother, shrewd as ever, showed no signs that she was frustrated at this turn of events. On the contrary, she looked intrigued. I could see the machinations starting to take shape in her mind, which made me decidedly nervous. I wasn't about to let my mother start her inexorable line of questions. I'd already put Georgina through enough with the red carpet. "If you'll excuse us, I promised Georgina a drink. Enjoy your evening." I swept Georgina away toward the bar, leaving my mother sputtering, still clutching the arm of the now openly angry blonde. Serves her right, I figured. I told her to stop meddling in my love life. Stepping up to the bar, I signaled the bartender. "What'll you have?" Georgina didn't hesitate. "Bourbon and ginger ale." "2 bourbon and ginger ale-ish," I told the bartender, then tipped him well when he returned with our cocktails. Passing one over to Georgina, I took a sip of mine. It tasted good. Just a hint of sweetness to temper the bourbon. Georgina skipped the sip and opted for a gulp instead, emptying half her glass. "I'm out of my depth," she murmured after a moment, then turned to me, giving me a hard look. "That was your mother?" Awe and despair seemed to intermingle in her tone. "I just met your mother." I nodded. It was bound to happen. My mother is ubiquitous in Savannah. Like mosquitoes in June, she's going to latch onto you sooner or later, it's just a question of when. Shaking her head, Georgina took another drink. "Is that the woman you didn't want to be set up with?" Interestingly enough, no. The setup I'm trying to avoid is from my friend Axel. I heard someone call my name inside. Who just happens to be heading our way right now. I turned my head to see my best friend approaching with a female on each arm. Of course he would choose this moment to pop up, and with not one but 2 models in tow. "Is this her?" he asked as he came to a stop by my side. "I have to meet the girl that managed to get the great Nathaniel Parker out on a date." "This is she," I said, staring daggers at my friend. This wasn't exactly what I'd had in mind for the evening so far. "Miss Georgina Franklin, I'd like to introduce you to Axel Marston." "Nice to meet you," Georgina said with an amused expression. Axel leaned in closer. "The pleasure is entirely mine." I took a step to put myself between Georgina and Axel, motioning toward his companions. "Shouldn't you introduce us to your dates for the evening?" He never took his eyes off Georgina, making my blood pressure rise. He jerked his head to the left. "This is Tiffany," then jerked it to the right, "and this is Bunny." "I'm Bunny," said the platinum blonde on his left, her tone indignant. "I'm Tiffany," said the dark-haired female on his right in a matching tone. I held back a chuckle, but Georgina didn't bother to. "You might try name tags." Axel smiled rakishly, then abandoned his dates to maneuver past me and reach Georgina's side. When Nathaniel told me he had a date, I was certain he was making it up, or his mother had finally worn him down. Imagine my surprise to see that he's found a girl all on his own. And I can't say I blame him for turning me down. Turning back, Axel fixed me with a knowing smile. "Good choice with this one. You better watch your back, or I'll steal her away from you." Georgina let out a laugh like the pealing of tiny bells. "I think you have your hands full already." Glancing in the model's direction, I saw twin pouts on their beautiful faces. Summoning the bartender once again, I ordered a round of champagne for the girls. They thanked me as I passed them their glasses, the dark-haired one giving me a coy smile that told me she was the one who'd hoped to score a date with me tonight. She was gorgeous, there was no doubting that, but she couldn't hold a candle to my Georgina. I started, realizing that I already considered Georgina mine. She'd taken hold of my heart so fast, I barely noticed it was happening, but I couldn't deny it. Georgina was mine, and I was hers. Now I just needed to convince her of that fact. Taking her by the hand, I started to lead Georgina away from the bar. "Enjoy your evening," I said over my shoulder as I steered her to our table. I pulled out the chair for her, then took the seat next to her. The dinner arrived, and this time it tasted better than the usual charity gala fare. I wondered for a moment if it was the company that made it more delicious. Even the speeches couldn't dampen my spirit. Being with Georgina made everything better. When the speeches had finished and the dishes were cleared away, the jazz quartet started to play, and guests began making their way onto the dance floor. I stood, giving Georgina a polite little bow before extending a hand to her. She took it, so I seized the opportunity to lead her out onto the floor. Having her in my arms again was heaven. I'd only known her for a few short hours, but in that time, I'd come to the conclusion that I was irrevocably in love with Miss Georgina Franklin. She was looking up at me with those cat eyes, a ghost of a smile on her dusky pink lips. The rest of the room melted away, and it was just me and the resplendent woman before me, her hair like living flame, eyes sparkling like emeralds. I did what felt like the most natural thing in the world. I kissed her. When she kissed me back, I felt complete. Whole. Like I was the man I was always meant to be. Cupping her cheeks, I kissed her with everything inside me, reveling in the passion I felt as she returned my kiss with just as much fervor. In that golden moment, I knew that she was the only woman for me.
Chapter 2. His kiss was overwhelming, forcing electricity into every fiber of my being. I'd never been kissed like this, never had a kiss be so all-encompassing. Nathaniel Parker was like a force of nature. Out of breath, I pulled back, blushing furiously as I realized all the couples around us had just watched us make out on the dance floor. Nathaniel brushed a thumb across my cheek, drawing my attention back to him. His smile was gentle as he led me from the dance floor and back toward the bar. "You look like a woman who could use a glass of water," he said. He motioned the bartender over and soon he was thrusting ice water into my hand. I took a sip, grateful for the cool drink, as my body was overheating after that kiss. I was just about to compliment him on his dancing skills when his mother appeared by his side. "I saw that little smooch fest on the dance floor," she said, her tone intent. "It seems you've been hiding a serious relationship from me." My eyes widened and I looked away, not wanting to seem as if I was eavesdropping on this conversation. Then again, they were having it openly in front of me. I'll admit, I am totally serious about Georgina, and I haven't been hiding anything. My heart started slamming into my ribcage and I almost choked on the sip of water I was taking. Serious? About me? Suddenly, the absurdity of the situation hit me. There I was, at some charity event for the rich and famous, listening to a billionaire tell his mother that he liked me. Will wonders never cease? I was just country girl, a nerdy data cruncher, a nobody from Stone Mountain. Now I was the belle of the ball and it was all too mind-boggling. Maybe Sam was right. Maybe I was playing the role of Cinderella tonight. But the clock was about to strike midnight, and I needed to make an exit, quick. Excusing myself, I headed in the direction of the restrooms, but instead of going inside, I shoved my way out the door and into the stairwell. Rather than try to climb down 4 stories in high heels, I pulled my shoes off and walked down in my stocking feet. At the ground floor, I shoved my feet back into the expensive footwear and made my way into the lobby. It wasn't hard to catch a cab home, and soon I was standing in front of my apartment building. Sam was painting when I let myself in, and when she caught sight of me in my gala attire, she let out a long whistle. "George, I've never seen you looking more gorgeous. I bet your elevator prince couldn't take his eyes off of you." I smiled, touched by her compliment. "Did you eat dinner?" She nodded, pointing to the dirty dishes in the sink. "How about you? Did they have caviar and oysters on the shell?" I shook my head. "Grilled salmon or filet mignon," I said. "Was it like a real ball? Did you dance the night away?" Being as how it's only 10 p.m., I couldn't have danced the night away that long. Sam giggled. "I was going to ask why you were home so early. I'll tell you all about it, but first, unzip me." Sam helped me out of the fancy dress and I took it into my room to hang it up, giving Sam orders to bust out the ice cream and 2 spoons. Seeing the dress there on the hanger next to the rest of my clothes, which looked sad and tired in comparison, I realized the night spent with Nathaniel was already starting to feel like a dream. "So did he ask you out on a second date?" Sam asked when we were settled on the couch, digging our spoons into the pint of chocolate chip. "Not exactly," I said. "Let's say the opportunity to ask didn't really arise." I explained how I'd fled without saying goodbye. "Why in the heck would you do that? This guy sounds like the real Prince Charming." "Sure, if Prince Charming also happened to be my boss." "What?" she said, mouth open, spoon frozen halfway to it. Nathaniel turned out to be Nathaniel Parker, the CEO of the company that just hired me. "Holy moly," Sam breathed. "Your CEO asked you out, and you said yes?" I didn't know he was the CEO then. It was my first day, after all. Sam set down her spoon, a look of consternation on her face. "Well, dang, this is a pickle. You like him, right?" I nodded. "There's nothing not to like. He's handsome, smart, funny. And a billionaire." Sam let out a slow breath. "And he likes you, right?" "Well, he told his mother he was serious about me." Another long whistle. "Well, girl, I guess this CEO thing is going to have to work itself out. I say go for it." I looked at her like she had a screw loose. I can't just go for it with my CEO. I'm pretty sure that's against company policy. Pretty sure ain't completely sure, she pointed out. Besides, love conquers all, which means it will find a way around this little employer-employee hurdle. I've worked hard for this, I started, but Sam interrupted me. Look, George, no one knows better than I how hard you've worked and how badly you want a career. But jobs come and go. True love is for eternity. I tried not to roll my eyes. Letting out a slow breath, I rubbed my face. It's all happening so fast. Sam patted me on my knee. That's how love works. It burns your insides like a comet, bright and beautiful. And fleeting, I didn't add, although I thought it. As I lay in bed that night, the thought came back to me. Maybe this thing with Nathaniel was a fling. Maybe he was infatuated with my novelty. It might fizzle out before it even got started. I wanted that thought to bring me comfort, to allow me to focus again on building my budding career. Instead, it made me feel sick to my stomach. It seemed Nathaniel had made a lasting impact, even in such a short time. The next morning, I was just finishing up the dishes after breakfast when the apartment intercom buzzed. It was a delivery for me. 3 dozen long-stem red roses along with a card. I wish you hadn't left without saying goodbye last night. Whatever upset you, I will make it up to you. You have my word. I smiled at the card, unable to help myself. It was clear that I was crushing hard on Nathaniel Parker. But I knew that dating the CEO wouldn't play well with my coworkers. It wasn't the impression I wanted to make. But I didn't want to give up Nathaniel either. Talk about a rock and a hard place. I was caught between a billionaire with rock-hard abs and a hard start to my career. On Monday morning, things went from hard to full-on difficult. Arriving at my desk, I was confused to see my belongings cleared from it and sitting in a box. A jolt of fear went through me, and I wondered if I'd been fired already. The department head approached. I had the secretary put everything in that box for you. It's ready for the transfer. Transfer? I asked, confused. He nodded. Yeah, you're going upstairs, right? I'm sorry, I said, shaking my head. Upstairs? Dan let out a sigh. You've been transferred to the 10th floor. You can see Mr. Parker about your reassignment. I watched him walk away, unable to think of anything to say. Finally, I picked up the box and made my way to the elevators. Of course, the third one opened, but I ignored it, in no mood to risk the haunted elevator today. I took the middle one when it appeared, riding up to the top floor, 1,000 thoughts colliding in my brain. Getting off the elevator, I approached the large desk behind which sat an intimidating woman. The nameplate announced her as Angela Marcus. Dark hair and eyes, professional clothing pressed and starched, she had a look on her face that said she tolerated no nonsense. I set the box down by my feet, then attempted a smile. I'm here to see Mr. Parker. She looked me up and down, then let out a little huff. Of course you are. I'm Georgina Franklin. I've been transferred up here. You're Georgina Franklin, she said, and I expected her tough expression to break, but if anything, it got tougher. Coming from around the desk, the woman gestured for me to follow. I picked up the box and approached the imposing door right behind her. She knocked twice, then turned the knob without waiting for a response. Sweeping her arm in front of her, she motioned me to enter. Good luck, Georgina Franklin, she said, then closed the door behind me. I stood in an opulent office. In the distance, I saw Nathaniel seated behind an imposing desk. He waved me forward, so I took a seat in one of the chairs across from his desk, once again setting my box of belongings on the floor. Good morning, Georgina, he said, giving me a warm smile. It's a pleasure to see you again. His deep voice melted my insides, but I wasn't going to let my hormones blindside me once again. I held up my hand and took a deep breath. Before we exchange pleasantries, would you kindly tell me what the heck is going on here? Nathaniel laughed, a sound that never failed to send tingles across my skin. I've decided to add you to my personal team, which means I'm now your supervisor. I swallowed hard at the news, barely able to focus on what he said next. Did you get the flowers? I blinked rapidly, remembering to speak. Yes. Yes, I did. They were lovely. After a beat, I composed myself enough to ask, "Why did you transfer me?" "I'm afraid that's a little complicated. I was to learn that day that Nathaniel was the king of the understatement."
Chapter 3. I wasn't sure how she was going to take what I said next, but it was all according to plan, and none of my plans had been anything less than brilliant. Unless you counted the time I'd mixed up two companies I was considering for acquisition, and sent an offer that was much too high to the wrong company. Or the time when I'd gotten not one, not two, but 3 pizzas when I'd been trying to order dinner after a few too many beers in college. Or the time when I was 5 and decided to give my mother's dog a haircut. Still, those were good plans. It was only the execution that had given me trouble. But this time, I would make sure everything was flawless. There was no way I was going to risk losing the beautiful Georgina. Since we met, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. I thought it would be hard to admit that fact, but it wasn't. Indeed, the words started flowing out of me, and I was barely conscious of what I was going to say before I said it. For all of my adult life, I have been focused on rebuilding my family's fortune. That has taken precedence over all other things, relationships included. But when you walked into that elevator and into my life, I knew things were about to change. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice so low it was almost a whisper. "I'm crazy about you, if you can't already tell. I want a relationship, a real one, with dates and flowers and exchanging apartment keys. I want all of it. Most importantly, I want you." Her expression was one of surprise mixed with something that was a little harder to name. An adorable blush stained her cheeks and her mouth worked, but nothing was coming out. At last she regained control of her faculties enough to respond. But you're my boss, my direct supervisor. You said it yourself." "Correct." She frowned. "You're the CEO, so you have to know the rules. Relationships between supervisors and the employees they supervise are expressly forbidden." I nodded. "Now comes the hard part. I'm very familiar with the rules, which is why I had you transferred in the first place, so I could do something to fix the situation." "And what's that?" she asked, her face broadcasting genuine curiosity. "Fire you." She sat there, blinking, as if she couldn't process what I just said. "Come again?" "I'm letting you go, Georgina. As of today, you are no longer an employee of the Parker Group." She shot up out of her chair like her behind was on fire. "You what?" "If I terminate you, then we can pursue our personal relationship," I said, continuing to outline my plan. "There will be no pesky rules and ethics standing in the way. You're firing me from my dream job, so you can date me?" I hadn't anticipated the level of incredulity I was receiving. Expecting her to be excited about this turn of events, I realized quickly that I might have miscalculated. "In not so many words, yes, but that's not all I'm doing. I'm also—" "I can't believe you thought this was the solution to your little problem," she said, her voice filling with anger. "Do you know how hard I worked to get here? I'm not saying you didn't. And if you'll just let me. This was the job I've always wanted, at a good company that I believed in. At least, I used to believe in it until the CEO pulled this malarkey." Her indignation was palpable, fury radiating off her in waves. I liked her fire, loved her indomitable spirit, but in this one instance, I wished she would just trust me and give me a chance to explain. But her anger wouldn't allow it. She cut me off before I could even get a word in. "You can't do this. It isn't fair. It smacks of entitlement. You can't just play with your employees' lives because you've decided you're attracted to one of them." "Let me finish," I said, allowing my own temper to arise. I stood up and circled the desk, trying for a chance to explain. "You're like a spoiled child, used to getting your own way. Well, I'm not your plaything. I'm not a toy you can use until you get bored. This is my life you're ruining. I know you're not a toy, Georgina, and I'll never treat you like one. You're a smart, beautiful woman who deserves to be treated with respect. Then why aren't you treating me with respect? She tossed her head in frustration, her fiery hair falling loose from the bun she'd tucked it into and cascading around her shoulder in glossy auburn waves that made my throat dry up and words desert me. It took a moment for the power of speech to return. That is, you don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly. Her gorgeous cat eyes narrowed. I might be some small-town girl from a family who doesn't have much, especially compared to your insane level of wealth, but that doesn't make me stupid. Just because you're rich enough to buy and sell half of the East Coast, that doesn't mean you can control me with your money. I never for 1 second thought you were stupid. You're a bright, capable woman, which is why I want you to listen to what I'm offering. I don't want an offer from you, she said, losing the last vestige of calm she possessed. Georgina stabbed a finger into my chest, letting loose and telling me exactly what I could do with my offer. It was clear I wasn't getting through to her, which meant it was time to resort to desperate measures. There was only one way to quiet her down, so I could explain the second, and more important part of my plan. I had to kiss her. I took advantage of her closeness, grabbing her shoulders and pulling her in tight to me. Her mouth opened, her eyes widening. What do you think you're? I didn't let her finish her question. Instead, I captured her lips in a fierce kiss meant to shake her apart, down to the foundation. At first she was still, shocked by my audacity, but it didn't take long for her to start struggling. I deepened the kiss, pouring every ounce of my desire into it, seducing her with my mouth, and before long, she relaxed into it, surrendering herself before gripping me tightly and kissing me back with a passion that made my heart pound like a bass drum. That's why it was devastating when she suddenly broke the kiss and pushed me away. How dare you, she hissed, a look of betrayal taking over her features. I'm not going to let you use your magnetism against me. Georgina stalked back to the door, bristling with anger. Before opening it, she looked over her shoulder. Whatever we had is over. Opening the door, she started through it before pausing. This isn't going to stop me from building a career I can be proud of. Then she was gone. I fell back against the sofa, feeling like I'd been hit by a hurricane. Nothing had gone to plan, and now I'd lost the only woman I'd ever loved.
Chapter 4. I was storming out of Nathaniel's office, my head held high, when I was stopped by a curious voice. And where do you think you're going? It was the intimidating woman at the desk, the one Nathaniel had called it Angie when we were in the elevator. For a moment, I sent up an evil prayer that he'd get trapped in the elevator again, alone this time, for a few days, or weeks. You can tell your boss that he's a jerk and I wouldn't go out with him again for $1 billion and a stake in the company. I didn't get the reaction I expected for my tirade. Angie laughed, a deep belly laugh, and I shook my head, figuring it was best to get the heck out of there. I was almost to the elevators when I remembered something. Oh, and tell your boss I'll be returning that ridiculously expensive dress. There's no way I'm keeping it now. Angie flipped a thumbs up in my direction, and I hit the down button for the elevator. Then I remembered my prayer and figured it was safer to stick to the stairs. 10 flights later, I headed through the lobby and out the door. I looked back, peering up at the 10th floor of the Parker Group while squinting against the sun. A few days ago, I thought I was embarking on a journey that would lead to me fulfilling lifelong goals. Instead, I was walking out less than a week later, jobless, and with a broken heart. I splurged on a cab ride home since my eyes were too blurry to read the bus signs for some reason. I managed to hang on until I walked through the door, and then the tears started to fall in earnest. Sam looked up from her breakfast of sugary cereal to give me a confused look. Oh, honey, what happened? Why are you home so early? I got fired, I said, and then the floodgates opened. I collapsed into a chair at the kitchen table and rested my head against the tabletop, feeling more defeated than I ever have in my life. It didn't take long for Sam to pull all of the details out of me. Oh, Georgina, that's just terrible. I sniffled, wiping my eyes as some of my anger came back. I had so many plans on how I was going to build my career, move up the ladder. It might not be much, but research is what I've always been good at, and I knew my employer would recognize my skills and reward them. I frowned, feeling bitter. Too bad the CEO noticed my other assets first and ruined everything. Maybe you're misinterpreting things, Sam said. She was always the glass half full type. How can I misinterpret "you're fired so I can date you"? He was so sweet in the elevator, but ever since I discovered he's a billionaire, he started treating me like he owned me already. That's not anything I could stand for, and you know that. Nodding, Sam reached across the table to put her hands over mine. George, we've been friends for so long, I know everything about you, from the fact that you hate pickles to your belief that you can smell rain before it starts. I started to say defensively, but she cut me off. You can't give up. The man you described to me last week is not the same man you are describing now. You need to give him the benefit of the doubt. I think this all might be a misunderstanding. The only thing I misunderstood is that I was cut out for the city life. Maybe I should go back home to Stone Mountain, lick my wounds. Sam stood, coming around the table and lifting me up to give me a giant hug. That's nonsense. How about we go out and grab some lunch, huh? See a little more of the city before you write it off entirely? I nodded, feeling too defeated to do anything but agree. We headed out a cute eatery downtown, and Sam noted each unique architectural feature or interesting accent along the way. The food was good, I guessed, because I really couldn't taste anything. It was strange. I'd only known Nathaniel for a few short days, but it had already felt like so much longer. There was a connection there that was exciting and intoxicating. Something I'd never expected but deep down I'd always wanted. Nathaniel was a dream man come to life. Until he wasn't. I picked at my food, staring out the window and watching the city go by. I liked Savannah, what little I'd seen of the city, and I was in no rush to return home to Stone Mountain, despite what I'd said to Sam earlier. Besides, I wasn't the type to crawl home with my tail between my legs. There were other opportunities out there, I just had to look for them. Being let go from my dream job didn't have to be the end of the world. Still, I couldn't help the disappointment that washed over me in waves. I'd planned everything around this job and now it had evaporated like dew on a hot southern morning. After lunch, we walked along the river. Maybe it was the sunshine, or the soft breezes off the rolling water, but some of my anger began to dissipate. Sadness bubbled up to take its place, making me want to sink into the soft green grass and give up. I wasn't sure how I'd misjudged someone so greatly. In the elevator, Nathaniel had seemed like my knight in tailored armor. He was empathetic, engaging, and interested in what I had to say. I'd exposed one of my biggest weaknesses to him, and he'd told me I was strong. And when he kissed me, it was one of the most intense, most enjoyable sensations of my life. Even that night of the gala, when I felt so out of my element, he was a steadying influence. He'd given me hope that maybe I could fit into environments like that. Maybe I wasn't just a nerd who loved crunching data. Maybe I could be a socialite too, or at least pretend to be one every now and again. He'd given me enough hope to believe that maybe something could happen between us, despite our little ethical issue. But his solution to our problem was completely unacceptable. It was high-handed, inconsiderate, and just plain wrong. "You're too up in your head," Sam said, pulling me out of my thoughts. "I know what's going on in that brain of yours. You're going over every moment that's happened in the past few days, tabulating the actions taken and not taken, trying to determine when things went sideways." "I can't help it," I admitted. "It just doesn't make sense. How does someone go from being a compassionate, kind-hearted gentleman to an entitled jerk in a matter of days?" Sam shrugged. "I told you, George. It's a misunderstanding. The universe is trying to tell you something. You just have to listen." Frowning, I looked out over the river, watching the sun-dappled waves ebb and flow. I don't know about the universe, but Nathaniel certainly wanted to tell me something. I remembered then how he'd kept trying to get a word in and I hadn't let him. You should have heard him out. Maybe he would have said something that resolved this whole silly issue. I appreciated Sam's lighthearted take on life, but right now it rankled. It's not a silly issue, Sam. He fired me. I know. But maybe he had a good reason. I'd thought it was because he figured dating a billionaire would be higher on my list than a career I'd worked hard to gain. Then again, could he really be that bad a judge of character? We might not have known each other long, but surely he knew me better than that. Arriving back at our apartment, Sam set into her painting once again. Right now, everything just looked like little blobs of paint on a canvas, but I knew that by the time it was done, it would be something remarkable. Sam was extremely talented when it came to art. Giving advice, on the other hand, wasn't her strong suit. I thought about starting my job search, but got hung up when I had to decide whether to list my tenure at the Parker Group on my resume. Giving up, I figured a nap wouldn't hurt. It had been ages since I'd had an afternoon to do nothing with. Sleep seemed as good as anything else. At least while I was asleep, I could forget the ache in my chest where my heart lived.
Chapter 5. I knew it was 5 o'clock, because Angie showed herself into my office without knocking. Like every other day, she plopped tomorrow's agenda onto my desk and announced she was heading home. I nodded, not even bothering to look up from the spreadsheet I'd been failing to make headway on for the last couple hours. Oh, by the way, she said on her way out, that Georgina is one smart cookie. She's a keeper. I leaned back, letting out a bitter bark of laughter. Funny, since there's no way of keeping her now. Angie turned back, settling herself into one of the chairs in front of my desk. Well, she did make quite a show of leaving. I'm supposed to tell you that you're a jerk and she wouldn't go out with you for all your billions, or something like that. I sighed. I don't know what happened. The plan was airtight. You had a plan for all that mess? Angie laughed. I did, but once I told her she was fired, she wouldn't let me get a word in edgewise. Gee, I wonder why. I frowned at my assistant. I would have told her that I was giving her a better position at another company I have a stake in, one where she couldn't be accused of getting special treatment as the CEO's girlfriend. But she stormed out without listening, and I doubt she's ready to hear the rest of my proposal yet. Angie gave me a hard look. Lips pursed, eyes to the ceiling, her expression said something along the lines of, "What did you expect, dummy? I don't blame that girl for walking out on you. I would have done the same thing. But why? We both get what we want, and she gets a higher position with a better title and a better salary. What's wrong with that solution? What's wrong is you took away her choice. You fired her without consulting her, and just expected she'd be willing to go along because it means she gets to date you. But did you even ask her if she wanted to date your sorry behind?" I blinked at her tone, but I held fast. It seemed I was in need of some real talk, and Angie was the best person to deliver it. I assumed she assumed. She looked down at her fingernails, impeccably manicured as always. You assumed she'd take some job you gifted her with from on high, not caring that she had no say in her own career. What did you give up to date her? I shook my head, confused. What do you mean? I mean, she was supposed to sacrifice the job she worked hard to get, and what did you give up? Nothing, I mumbled, realizing my mistake. Exactly. She stood up, leaning onto my desk to make her point. If you want to be with this girl, you need to go to her and apologize. Then give her a choice. A real choice, something that shows her you're willing to compromise, and that things won't always be one-sided between you. She straightened, bending over, and then resurfacing with a box in her hands. She set it on the desk. You can take this to her. It's her stuff. I assume she forgot it when she made her dramatic exit. Thanks, Angie, I said, meaning it. She replied, headed towards the door again. Remember, she said just before she walked out, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. She closed the door behind her, and I made a note to give my assistant another raise. Angie really was indispensable. I was leaving the office a few hours later, trying to get up the gumption to decide which takeout place to order from that night, when my phone rang. It was Axel, and the levity in his voice was instantly annoying. Hey, bud. How's tricks? Hey, Axel. What's up? Just seeing if you want to grab some dinner. Tiffany and Bunny kind of got into a little fight over me, and now I'm flying solo again. Poor Axel. My heart weeps for you. He chuckled. How about grabbing a bite at the Public? We're never going to get a table at this time, I warned him. Nonsense. They keep a table on reserve for me. On the rooftop, naturally. I agreed to meet him in 15 minutes and found myself waiting another 10 for him to arrive. True to his word, we were shown to his private table on the rooftop, with a view over Savannah's bustling downtown. Once our cocktails had arrived, Axel leaned back and fixed his gaze on me. What's wrong? You've got a hangdog expression on your face, which might be the first time I've seen that on you. I took a drink, then set my gaze on the sunset in the distance. I screwed things up with Georgina. Axel let out a sudden laugh, his palm slapping the table. Already? But you barely met her. Thanks for reminding me, I said, my tone harsh. I'm sorry, he apologized immediately. It's just a little hard to believe. Mr. Perfect Parker messed up big time. I did, I said, nodding. I guess I'm just out of practice. I'll say. I think the last girl you liked was Mary Catherine way back in 7th grade. So what did you do? Choose the wrong wine with dinner? I fired her. Axel's eyes widened and he fell into another fit of laughter. Wow, bruh. You really did screw up. I know. And now I can't fix it. It wasn't like I was going to fire her and not give her another job. But I knew she'd never date me if she was an employee of the Parker Group, so I was going to fix that. I had everything lined up, but she wouldn't even hear of it. Can you blame her? I mean, you fired her. Yeah. Angie already raked me over the coals. I realize now that I acted like a high-handed jerk. I put my head in my hands. I love her, Axel. And now she won't give me the time of day. The great Nathaniel Parker laid low by a female. Will wonders never cease? I glared at him, wondering why I still called him my friend. He reached over, patting my shoulder. All right, I get it. But don't worry. That's what best friends are for. I'm going to help you get her back. How? I asked, skepticism rife in my tone. I'm going to help you perfect the perfect proposal. My jaw dropped. The what? Perfect proposal. You said you loved her. So make it official. She's going to think I'm out of my gourd. Why would she marry me when she won't even date me? Axel sighed. She knows who you are now. She knows any proposal from you would be extremely serious. She probably thinks you're frivolous, capricious, hiring and firing on a whim. Proposing marriage shows her you're not those things. You're a man who knows what he wants. It still sounds risky. What did Angie say? Axel asked, leaning back and taking a drink of his cocktail. She said that I need to give her a real choice, to show her I'm willing to compromise. See? He extended his hand, as if what he was saying were obvious. Marriage is the ultimate compromise. I shook my head. I don't know. We haven't even known one another for a week yet. Don't you think that's moving much too fast? My friend shrugged. It's the only thing that makes sense. Not only will she know that you're serious, but you'll be locking her down. A beauty with brains like Georgina only comes around once in a lifetime. She could easily get any number of guys, myself included. And I'm just as rich and twice as handsome. Stay away from her, I growled, making Axel grin. It's clear you want to be with her. So why wait? I couldn't believe what was about to come out of my mouth. You're right. I was head over heels in love with Georgina, and I wanted her for the rest of my life. Not for a week, not for a year. Forever. But I knew I only had one shot to make things right, and this time, I couldn't screw anything up. Looking out over the streets of Savannah, a plan started to form itself in my mind. This time, it would be flawless. It had to be, or I'd lose Georgina for good.
Chapter 6. The next day, Sam and I were considering colors at the local art supplies store. How about this one? I asked, pointing to the 50th shade of blue we'd come across. That's really an aqua, don't you think? I'm looking for something deeper, something cooler. Like this? I said, pointing to another tube. George, that's aquamarine. I'm beginning to wonder if you're able to discriminate color shades. I laughed, defeated. I'm good with a box of 24 crayons, but it's clear that since there are 2,000 shades of blue, I'm out of my depth. Sam gave me a hug. It's okay. You're good at other stuff. Like math. I covered my face with my hands. Thanks, Sam. What? Math is important. Right then, I was doing the math on how much longer we'd be standing in the paint aisle. The over-under was 32.4 years. The longer I stared at the paint, the bluer I felt. I wondered which of the 2,000 or more shades was my blue. Which one represented heartbreak? We were walking home later when I noticed a familiar figure waiting on our stoop. Who is that? Sam asked as we drew closer. That's Nathaniel, I replied, my voice low. Really? Why didn't you tell me he was so handsome? I rolled my eyes, thinking back on the dozens of times I'd told her how hot he was. Why is he holding a box? I recognized the box as the one holding my belongings. I forgot it in his office. Yikes, Sam said. Awkward. I gave her a look that said, gee thanks, and then we were there, standing in front of the stoop. You must be the one causing all this trouble, Sam said as she moved to pass him on the stoop and enter the building. She winked at him, then wished him luck before going inside. What are you doing here? I asked when we were alone. You forgot this, he said, indicating the box. And I owe you an apology. He pivoted to the side to set the box down, then turned back to me. You were absolutely right to be angry with me. I realize now that I expected you to make a massive change in your life while I had to change nothing. It was unfair, and I recognize that now. His candor surprised me. Yes, thank you. I'm here because I want to try again. I was wrong to take away your choice, so that's why I'm here to lay out our options. The ultimate decision will be up to you. Your happiness is paramount. I was taken aback by the intensity in his expression. This was important to him, I could tell by his tone. My heart was racing. What are our options? When I fired you, it was to offer you another position, one I think you are eminently qualified for. One of my partnerships has a new venture, and I want you as Chief Innovation Officer. I'm a silent partner, which means I won't be your supervisor or even involved in day-to-day operations. It would be a nice promotion for you. My knees went weak, so I sat down heavily on the stoop. A promotion? Nathaniel stepped down off the stoop and nodded. But if you don't like that option, I've got another. I'll sell the company, divest entirely, and then we can see each other all we like. I felt like I'd been hit with a brick. Divest from the Parker Group? Is that what you're saying? Nathaniel smiled. If that's what you want. The Parker Group was the jewel in his empire's crown. It was the biggest and the best of his many companies and partnerships, and selling it would literally be selling his namesake. I know what you're offering, and I can't let you do that. You can't sell Parker Group. I'd be happy to do it, he said, his voice earnest. In fact, I'd sell my entire empire if that's what it takes. I know we haven't known each other long, but you, Georgina, are everything I've needed. I just didn't know it until now. He leaned in and took my hand. I've always believed in grabbing hold of every opportunity, and you're the biggest opportunity I'm ever going to get. Warmth filled me, tingles radiating across my skin from the physical contact. I couldn't believe what he was saying. It was too much to process. The world's most handsome billionaire was promising to walk away from his empire. For me. When he dropped to one knee, I thought I would have a heart attack. From his pocket he pulled a small velvet box. Inside was the most ostentatious diamond ring I had ever seen. Holding it out to me, he pierced me with a beatific smile. Georgina Franklin, I'm completely and utterly in love with you. Will you marry me? Everything I could have ever wanted was being dropped in my lap at the same moment. My old job back, or an even more lucrative one. And even better, the man of my dreams asking for my hand in marriage. As he'd said, he hadn't given me a choice before. But now he was giving me all the power, and that wasn't what a relationship was about. A relationship was about sharing, about compromise. I stood, then motioned to him. Get up. I could tell by the look on his face that he thought I was about to refuse him. If you don't like the options, I can. Shh, I said, putting a finger to his lips. It's my turn to talk. He nodded, giving me a small smile. I returned it. I appreciate you recognizing that the way you'd planned to handle things wouldn't work. Now you're shifting the balance of power in my direction. If we really want to treat this like a relationship that's going to last, then we need to make this decision together. Does that mean you're accepting my offer? I stood on tiptoes, pulling his head down so I could reach his lips. My kiss was soft, gentle, a ghost of my lips on his. Nathaniel Eastman Parker, I love you too. You would have thought he'd just closed a multi-billion-dollar deal the way he let out a shout of jubilee. Picking me up, he swung me in a circle before kissing me again, this one no ghost, but a full-blooded kiss that left me breathless. Even after he set me down, my world was still spinning. He leaned in close, whispering in my ear, how about we go back to my place and do some intense negotiating? I laughed, feeling happier than I could remember. I had a feeling that negotiating the next stage of my life with Nathaniel was going to be an exciting process. I love you, he said, leaning in and pressing a kiss to the tip of my nose. And I love you. One thing though, Parker. Name it, he said, a twinkle in his eye. I'm keeping the green dress. His laughter echoed through the cobblestone streets of Savannah, reminding me of the clip-clop of a horse-drawn wagon. It was a good sound. A homey sound. His home was now my home. After all, home is where my heart is. And he had my heart, always.
Epilogue. 6 months later.
The tolling of the church bells were filling my stomach with butterflies. I was in the small room set aside as a dressing room, my heart beating harder than I'd ever felt it. Are you ready? Sam asked, a bright smile on her face. She was lovely in her lilac bridesmaid gown. I took one last look in the mirror, almost unable to recognize the woman staring back at me. My hair was in an intricate updo, covered with a delicate white veil. My skin was flushed in my ivory silk gown. I'd never looked more beautiful. Or more nervous. I shouldn't be nervous. Today was the day that I married the man who had stolen my heart. Not that I wanted it back. He'd keep it safe and treasure it. For that, I would be eternally grateful. I stood, smoothing down my dress and giving my best friend a tremulous smile. Let's go. We moved into the vestibule, lining up behind the closed church door. My father was there, a wide grin on his face. You look lovely, he said as I took my place at his side. Thanks, Dad, I said, holding back tears. Then it was time, as the music changed and the doors were thrown open. I walked down the aisle, my eyes riveted on the man standing at the altar. Nathaniel was always the handsomest man on earth, but he'd outdone himself today. The first time I saw him, I thought he was a fallen angel. Today, he outshined all the heavenly host. My heart expanded in my chest and I realized that after today, he'd be mine forever. I joined him at the altar, barely able to breathe. The priest began the ceremony, and I tried hard to focus, but I couldn't stop looking into his eyes. They were like molten gold, hot and tumultuous, filled with emotion. Then it was time for our vows. Nathaniel's voice was clear and steady as he spoke. I used to think the best feeling in the world was closing on some massive business deal, making some powerful play that would put more money in my bank account. But all of that pales in comparison to spending one moment with you. The best feeling in the world is knowing that you're the one I come home to. You're the one by my side. You're the one sleeping beside me at night. You're the one I'm going to wake up to in the morning. The best feeling in the world is having you as my wife. I love you, Georgina, and I'm never going to stop loving you. This is my vow to you. I blinked back tears, beyond moved by his tender words. It was time to tell him what he meant to me, and I prayed I could get through it without breaking down. Nathaniel Eastman Parker, I moved to Savannah thinking I was going to be the newest research assistant at the Parker Group. Then I met you in a haunted elevator, and everything changed. I thought it was over when you fired me, but that was just the beginning of what has already been an amazing journey. I know that with you, I'll never be bored. With you, I'll discover new pieces of myself, because you'll draw them out of me. With you, I'll always feel safe and cared for. You're my light in dark places, and I know you'll never go out. I could see his eyes fill with unshed tears, and I had to wipe away my own. The priest pronounced us husband and wife, and the enormity of what had just happened surrounded me. But it wasn't a weight like I'd felt in the cave. If anything, it was a lightness that made me feel like I was floating. Love gives you wings, or so I'd heard, and it seemed like today was proving that adage true. When he kissed me, I knew that he was the only man that would ever make me feel this way. He was made just for me, my angel, and I'd never let him go. We burst out into the sunlight, a crowd cheering us on as we hurried toward the limo under a shower of birdseed. As soon as the door shut behind us, Nathaniel pulled me into his lap and kissed me senseless. I pulled away, feeling lightheaded, and rested my head on his shoulder. As we drove toward the reception, I considered all that had happened since I'd accepted his proposal several months before. We'd had a night of intense negotiations that had made me shiver with arousal. I'd finally decided to take the Chief Innovation Officer job, with the agreement that I could shadow in the position for at least 3 months, to ensure that I was a good fit. I knew it was a large step forward, and I wanted to make sure I was equipped to do the job well. It turned out I could, and I had been on my own for the last few months, making decisions that had helped steer the company forward and leading to a growth in profits and in ambition. Even though I was loving the new position, there was something I was eager to innovate that wasn't part of the company's mission statement. I was ready to start a family with Nathaniel. We hadn't even known each other a year yet, but a few days was enough time for me to be certain I wanted to spend the rest of my life with him. I knew it was what I wanted. I just wasn't sure if my new husband would share my enthusiasm. The reception was positively decadent, but then I'd allowed Nathaniel's mother free rein over the festivities. She was better suited to plan the event, and to me it didn't matter what the decorations looked like or what the caterer was serving. All I cared about was marrying the man I adored. When it came time for the couple's dance, I was relieved to finally be back in Nathaniel's arms. I was starting to wish this whole room of people would disappear so I could be alone with my husband. I rested my head against his chest as we swayed along to the slow song I'd always loved. "I've got a surprise for you," I said, meeting his golden gaze. "Is that right?" I nodded my head. "You'll see it when we get to the hotel. You simply won't believe what I'm wearing under this dress." Nathaniel chuckled, his gaze filling with heat. "I can't believe my luck." I blushed, my heart always fluttering when he looked at me like that. Then he said something that made my heart sing. "The only thing that could make me happier would be to start a family." "Really?" He nodded. "I can't wait to have children with you, children with your brains and my stunning good looks." I laughed, slapping him playfully. "You're so humble, it's amazing." "Isn't it?" he said with a grin. Standing on tiptoes, I gave my handsome new husband a sultry kiss. "Thank you," I said. "Thank me?" "I should be thanking you." "Why are you thanking me?" "Because I know that no matter what, you'll never leave me in a dark space. Just like I know you'll be the best father possible." "That's true, but I still won't be able to hold a candle to you." "I love you, Nathaniel Eastman Parker." "And I adore you, Georgina Franklin." "What say we get out of here and start making some babies?" I laughed all the way back to the limo, until he captured my lips in a kiss that I hoped would last a lifetime.
The end.